Book. Morning. Good morning. We got the Safe and Just crew with us. I'll give a few minutes so people can tune in. This is the Monday morning criminal justice cafe conversations with our partners over at Safe and Just. We have a guest with us. Josh Hoe is with us today. We're going to have some conversations surrounding the registry for sex offenders. So this is especially with and many of you who are tuning in right now. This has always been a controversial topic, and there have been a lot of times where we haven't had these conversations, and so it's kind of something that everyone is just like, I hate them, lock them up, throw away the key. And then we put that conversation over on the shelf, and if it ever comes up, it seems to strike anger in people without understanding the totality of it, right? Because, and many of you who are watching who know me, I've had a lot of these conversations with people, and I know firsthand, just hearing it straight from people, that whenever we hear criminal sexual conduct, we always go to worst case scenario. We always go to a child molestation. And we're not saying that this stuff doesn't happen. It does. And it goes to rape, like a violent type of rape. And we want to kind of have a conversation about that and kind of clear up some of the myths and give some facts and some stats to this, while at the same time discussing a solution to it that potentially can actually work. And I think with a large majority of people in the community, they just simply don't know. Everyone's left to their own speculations and ideas and concepts that they have come up with on their own and throughout conversation with other people. So I think one thing is we need to be educated on it. And sure, need to have an understanding of this. And I think a lot of the anxiety that people have in that conversation, the anxiety is a byproduct of a lack of understanding. When we don't understand something, it produces the wrong emotions. It can produce the anxiety over the conversation, all that. So that's the point in today. And we brought some people from Safe and Just, Troy and Rick, and we got Josh with us, who this is their lane. Many of you know me. Mine's reentry. I love it. That's my role inside of the whole criminal justice reform. I love meeting the men and women when they come home, walking alongside of them and making sure. So that's my role. Their role is dealing with the policy stuff, criminal justice reform. And although that's not my main thing, I still want to be a part of it, but I can't invest all my time into it because my passion is over here. So, but I appreciate these guys. I appreciate their work. And so I'm going to be quiet because I know people start putting in the comments telling me to shut up. So what I'm going to do is we're going to do some intro stuff. So we're going to start right with Mr. Reinster, Troy. Troy, take about 30 seconds and introduce yourself, what you do, where you're from, and who you are.
What I do, where I'm from, who I are. What I do is I am the outreach director with Safe and Just Michigan. We are a criminal justice reform advocacy organization, bipartisan, nonprofit, 501c3. Pre-COVID, all of our work was around working toward expanding expungement. We call it, part of the bill is called Clean Slate, which is coming up for hearing within the Senate committee June 4th, and hopefully a couple of weeks after that so we can get some testimony in. I am also the project director for an organization called Nation Outside, all formerly incarcerated, focused on civic engagement, building a base of people who've been impacted by the criminal justice system. So that is who I am, what I do, and where I'm from Muskegon. I originally am from Muskegon. I also am formerly incarcerated. I served 22 years in prison for an offense I committed in 1995 in Muskegon. So to all my Muskegon people, family and friends, hello, good morning. And Nate, thank you for having us on for this conversation. It's important.
You betcha. And I don't know if you caught it last week, but one of your childhood friends, Stan Irvin, commented on here, said he hadn't seen you since you guys were kids. So I'm not sure if you caught it. Remember Stan?
I just plugged in with Dion Irvin this morning.
Oh yeah, Dion. Stan Dion. Yeah, nerdy. Yeah. So he ended up calling me. Yeah, he ended up calling me and say, "Man, I ain't seen Troy since we were kids." So that was a good contact. So let's go on to my mentee, Rick Speck from Safe and Just. Rick, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell them a little bit about who you are.
How y'all doing? Good morning. My name's Rick Speck, formerly incarcerated. Unfortunately, I served multiple prison terms, 2 in the state, 1 in the feds. Got a combined about 18 and a half, 19 years of incarceration. My last unfortunate crime, I was incarcerated for 15 years and was released in 14, celebrated 6 years home last week.
Oh, good.
I'm a community engagement specialist currently with Safe and Just Michigan, so I handle a lot of the statewide stuff right now, and I'll be working on Clean Slate, the governor's pretrial. But in relation to talking about the registry today, leading up to this conversation, and then again at 12 o'clock, Safe and Just will be hosting a webinar, and we'll pop that info into the chat box at some point. It got me to looking into this, and as a father, as a grandfather, this is something that concerned me, right? I want to keep my family safe. And so as I was doing this research on this, I feel this conversation is really, really important today because a lot of things were revealed to me through research that I didn't quite realize, and began to see that, maybe this registry isn't such a good idea other than to make people feel good, that they feel safer because they know some information. But I just feel there's a lot of troubling things about this legislation. Doing the research, realizing as a business owner as well, small painting business, if I chose to employ somebody, then my company in effect is on the registry. So as an employer, I have an issue with that. I think that, through education comes clarity, and I hope we can provide folks with some clarity in relation to the sex offender registry.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for that. Josh, give us a little, this is your first time that we've been on here together on a live video. So tell us who you are and what you're up to, and then we'll begin after that.
I'm Josh Hoe. I'm a policy analyst at Safe and Just Michigan. Before that, I worked as a consultant, mostly trying to pass the First Step Act. I do a lot of, basically all the stuff that we do that's policy related, I'm pretty directly involved with, from Clean Slate to the jails task force to even opposing this current registry reform legislation. I'm originally from New York City, but I've lived around Ypsilanti since about 2002. And I did 3 years in the wonderful Michigan Department of Corrections. So got that going for me too. So
good. Well, glad you're on here. Glad you could join us for this conversation. It's needed. And I think a lot of us, and I think, I had this thought earlier, was like, there's some of us that we've been blessed to have a voice within this criminal justice reform. You take all of the brothers and sisters of the number, they're not able to do this. They don't have a platform. They don't have a group of people who will listen to them. And we have to be the voice for the voiceless. And I've always told people, I did a post here probably about a week ago with our county prosecutor's election to get ready to come up. And I always get this question. It says, well, Nate, how do you feel about law enforcement now that you're doing what you're doing? I said, because there's corrupt police officers, but then you got the guys coming home, keep going back. I said, this is my stance now. I don't choose sides. I choose what's right. So mine is always on the side of justice, whichever side that falls to. I have a zero tolerance for injustice. And even if certain things are frowned upon, if it's an injustice, I'm not riding with an injustice just because the majority of the people frown upon it. So I just wanted to make that clear. So we are a voice for many of the brothers and sisters of the number who don't have a voice. So let's begin the conversation. Josh, let's just start with you. let's just say there's some people on here who probably don't even have a clue about what the registry is. Could you just take a couple minutes, explain in very elementary terms, what is the registry?
So basically everyone who in the state of Michigan and nationally who gets convicted for what's considered to be a sex offense has to be on a registry. And that registry in Michigan has 3 tiers. There's tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. Tier 3 being for the people that have committed the most serious crimes. Really only about 9% of all people are tier 1. Very few percentage people are on tier 2, and 72% of the people are on tier 3. So pretty much almost everybody who has a sex offense gets kind of pushed toward tier 3. So all sex offenses, for the most part these days, I mean, not very many current charges go to tier 1 or to tier 2. The requirements are pretty extensive. If any of you remember being on parole and probation, it's kind of like that on steroids.
Yeah.
If you're a tier 3, you have to go report in person to the police 4 times a year, and probably a lot more than that, because anytime you change an internet identifier, which is like any of your ways that you identify yourself on the internet, your phone number, your car, your job. If you do, if you have multiple jobs, you have to report all that information and have it all on the record with the registry. And unlike so everybody's probably seen the stories where people talk about how there was a big police sweep and they get a bunch of sex offenders because of what they call failure to register. Now, just like remember, if you were on parole and probation, we talk about technical violations. Almost all of those are technical violations. So it's like someone who forgot to like say they got a new car and they go and they register their car and then they forget to take the old car off the registry. That's a violation. Every time you violate your terms of your registration, you're subject to either a misdemeanor or a felony and can be subject up to 4 years in prison. To give you an example, there were people who, like, one of the requirements of the registry is you can't what's called loiter within 1,000 feet of a school, but they don't really define loiter very well. Mm. And so one time there was a guy in Michigan who went to a restaurant. He's having lunch at a restaurant and he got arrested and ended up going back to prison because he was at a restaurant that was too close to a school. They considered that loitering, and that's up to the prosecutor and the judge as to how they determine that in a lot of cases. And there have been court cases about it. And so, there's a lot of requirements on the registry. There's kind of all the typical stuff that you would expect. And then there's a lot of, your boat, everything has to be registered and you have to keep track of that all the time. And if you mess it up, there are really serious consequences. And so you think about a lot of the guys that we've known who maybe, have a hard time with paperwork. That's one of the real problems with what happens with the registry.
Yeah.
Hope that gives you a basic idea.
Yeah, absolutely. So just a simple question here. So is the registry only for individuals who go to prison, or is it for if an individual go for a CSC crime, they go to prison, or is it prison jail? Or what if they don't get sent to either, but they cut a sex crime? Are they still have to be on the registry?
It's very rare that the prosecutors ever make a plea deal of any kind that doesn't include the registry. Okay. So you may not do time. Like originally, when I first got arrested, I was put on, I was supposed to do 10 months in jail, and I would be on the registry. The judge then threw that out, and I went to prison. Judges can do that kind of thing. And so, you could have a plea deal where you did no time, but you got put on the registry. And some people have that situation.
Wow. So let's just confine this just to the state of Michigan. Okay. How many people are on the registry just in the state of Michigan?
44,000, and it grows every year.
By how much each year, you think?
It's hard to put an exact. So the problem is because 72% of the people are tier 3, which is lifetime, it means there have to be a very large number of people would have to get off every year for it to shrink. So it always grows exponentially every single year. It's just hard to tell exactly what the rate is. You always have more people stuck on it than are ever getting off of it, and you have more people coming on every year. So,
well, how many people do you think are released annually from the Department of Corrections that have been convicted of a sex crime?
I can't tell you exactly, but I can tell you that it is one of the top three new, of all the people who are admitted into prison every year, it's one of the top three reasons people go to prison now. And you'll notice that I think we've experienced in this in all areas of law. I think you all have experienced this in whatever your area was, that once they start making something illegal, they find a million new ways to make those things grow. And so, what started out, like in 94, the sex offense registry was a law enforcement only registry that really only dealt with some regulatory things. And it's grown and grown and grown and grown and grown. There used to only be a few things that were sex crimes. Now there's hundreds of things that are sex crimes. And so you move from everything from, like, I think we've heard the examples of people like peeing in the park or something, all the way. All of those things do theoretically count as sex crimes. It's all up to how the prosecutor charges it.
Wow. So 44,000, that's a lot of people, right? So
almost a million. It's almost a million nationwide.
Nationwide. So there are people that are, let's just say the individuals watching. There are people who are on this registry that actually live in their neighborhood and they don't even know it. And because of misconceptions about it, there could be a fear that could come in. Because if they looked up in their neighborhood, they'll find red dots all over the place one day. And a lot of people, communities, but they don't, they don't see people getting raped and molested all throughout their neighborhood, do they?
I guess a question I have for you, Josh, is when you talked about the registry used to only be for law enforcement, right? And now it's been expanded to the general public. How has that made us safer as a community, having this knowledge that we have folks in our communities, that are on the registry? How does the registry make us safer as a community in that sense?
So, the best research that's been done suggests that it doesn't make us safer as a community to have it public. The research was done by J.J. Reddick at the University of Michigan, along with another co-author, and suggests that public registries actually make us less safe. They increase recidivism. And the reason is for fairly obvious reasons. If you make people radically insecure, you make it harder for them to get housing, you make it harder for them to get employment, you make it harder for them to connect with their community, and you make them feel surveilled 24/7, it makes them very insecure and they're more likely to commit new crimes. A lot of the way people recover and heal is through community. And if you're totally shut off from your community and got the scarlet letter 24/7, you're more insecure and less secure.
So it hurts us more than it helps us currently as a community.
That J.J. Prescott research has gone all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. Everyone uses that. That's the kind of the gold standard for that particular form of. Now, there is evidence that suggests that a law enforcement only registry actually can be helpful, but there's no evidence that I know of that says that a public registry actually makes us safer.
Yeah, like I said at the beginning of my intro, I was really thrown back as an employer that my business would be listed on the registry if I employed somebody that was on there. So that would come back, on the business owner. So I could see where, as a business owner, once I learned that, it would really make me think not just twice, but probably 3 times about whether I wanted to hire somebody, not just because of what comes with it, that baggage. Now my company's on the registry. Now how is that going to affect me and so rather than risk my livelihood and take care of my family and my other employees, I just won't do it. And so now I understand why there's a problem with employment. Because as an employer, I don't want my business on the registry.
I'll be honest, when I first came out, I went to a couple job interviews and everyone looked at me like I was Hannibal Lecter. They look at, because even when I was in prison, I always told everyone what I was in for. I always just am honest about it. And so I decided to start my own business. And that's really ultimately, I had some skill sets that I'm not sure everybody has when they were coming out of prison. And so I could do that. I'm not sure everyone can do that, but I was lucky enough to be able to do that. But it seemed very clear to me it was going to be very hard for me to get employment when I came out.
Josh, I got a couple questions for you. One of them is, what is the cost related to the registry and people having to register? Is there a cost related to it? And then a person being kind of classified or labeled, what costs are associated to that, and what burden does that create for a person who has a sex-related offense?
Well, in terms of overall costs, just operating the registry costs the state of Michigan millions of dollars a year. And that's just the basic cost. One of the main arguments we make against registries being better for the community is that it diverts law enforcement resources. So if you believe that we want, our law enforcement officers out investigating new crimes, if they're spending all their time doing registration sweeps, that trades off. If they have to send an officer out, that's money that they're not, everything is zero sum when it comes to law enforcement resources. And, so the actual costs, like I said, it costs over $1 million just to run the registry. And then there's the cost of everything you do to enforce it. So all of those things work together. I think you're also asking about the cost, the social cost on people who are registered. And, I have friends, hundreds of friends who are on the registry, maybe thousands. I don't know. I know a lot of people in Michigan who are on the registry. And I know guys who, like, when they walk into a room, I got one friend who's on a lifetime monitoring, which means they have to wear an electronic monitor for the rest of their life. And I was on monitoring for 2 years when I was on parole and probation. And
there's a cost tied to that too, right?
Sorry, what? Oh yeah, there's
a cost tied to that too.
Absolutely. In fact, the MDOC might not say this publicly, but they've definitely said privately that they really hate having to deal with the monitoring and all the parole and probation costs. It's really, really hard for them to keep up with all of that. But, for the person who has that, I've seen people who've come into a room full of people like a support group and just break down the first time they've been able to talk about just the amount of stress it is on their life every single day and how just totally despondent they are every single day. And these are people who already served their sentences, already served, already got off paper, and they're still just totally overburdened with, it's hard to get on with your life and try to do something right when you're constantly being reminded of how wrong you were.
Yeah, so I guess that's kind of like what we talk about, having that label, or we call it the mark of Cain, on you and having to bear that stigma for your entire life. So if you would just talk a little bit about some solutions, what have you thought through? What are the experts saying solution-wise that would be a good alternative to the registry and would also increase safety and enhance the lives of people who are returning to the community trying to lead a better life?
I could talk about some reforms that I would make to registration in just a second, but I want to foreground this with a couple of things I think are really important. The first one is that we really need to do some work in our society on talking about sexuality and prevention through educating people about correct sexuality. I think in our communities and throughout our country, we're so convinced that the way to deal with sex is to pretend it doesn't exist or to only deal with it within the home. People forget that almost all, I think it's like 92% of all sex crimes occur from a friend or family member, not from a stranger. And so the idea that we don't even talk about prevention, primary prevention, that's a huge problem. The second thing is that almost, research tends to show that almost all sexual offenses occur because of trauma. And so we need to be better, I think, in the very beginning at looking at when we get to people who have gotten so traumatized in their life that they're literally doing the worst things they can to other human beings. We have to address not only the trauma of the people who were victimized, which is incredibly important. We really need to make sure that happens. But we also need to recognize the trauma of the people who were committing the crimes, because they almost always were also victims at one point. I think Bruce Western, the sociologist, put it in his research that people who have committed violence or have committed these kind of crimes were almost always witnesses and victims themselves prior to ever becoming. We really have to deal with this idea of trauma as a foundational part of what we're trying to do. Like all of us know, going to prison does not solve trauma. It usually adds more trauma, right? And so what we have to do is turn, our whole system into something that at least, like I was saying the other day when we were talking about this, you almost have to make the RGC start out, from day one, let's start dealing with trauma and getting people healthier so that when they come back, they're ready to be in community. That should be, 96% of all people who are incarcerated someday are going to come back. And how they come back matters. It matters a lot. And so our what we call correctional institutions should be starting with trying to heal trauma, in my opinion.
Absolutely, yeah.
The roots of these problems. And so in terms of fixing the registry, there's lots of things I would do. I think, first I would make it a private only registry. That's the only thing that there's actually evidence for that says that it's successful. I would get
by private, you mean for law enforcement in the courts? Just to clarify that. Okay, thank you.
Second, I would do everything I could to make it as small a registry as possible. If you all are of the opinion, or anyone in the audience is of the opinion that registries are a really good idea, you want it to be the smallest registry possible. And the reason for that is if you open your map and there's 44,000 dots on it, that doesn't help you very much determine risk. Okay, if there's 4 dots, you know exactly where not to send your kids or not to do whatever, and so you want it to be the people who are the most risk. And so one of the things I think is really important is that people graduate from the registry. There's a lot of evidence that suggests that after 5 or 10 years, depending on your crime, that your likelihood of reoffense will actually go lower than someone in the general population.
Or equal to, right? You would be equal to, you would be on the same ground, basically, that somebody that has never committed, you have just as much chance to reoffend as they have to actually offend for the first time, correct?
So the way that you make the registry smaller is by making sure as many people that more people come off of it than go on to it. As long as you continue to have the same amount of people on it and more people going on it, the bigger and bigger it gets, the harder it is for there to be much value. Beyond that, I think, we need to get rid of registration requirements that aren't tied to any kind of evidence. There was a sex panic when this all happened. They made up a bunch of requirements. It turns out over time that a lot of those requirements don't really have anything to do with safety, and they are very burdensome on people. So get rid of the ones that you don't have evidence for. Stop. All of us know going into the police station 4 times a year is pretty traumatic for anyone who's been through all this kind of law enforcement stuff. No one likes to go to court. No one likes to go to the police station. So if there's not a need for that, if there's not an evidence-based need for that, that's trauma that can be avoided. There's lots of little things that I could suggest beyond that, but the most important things I think are just, making it the smallest possible registry, making it most functional for people who are trying to determine safety needs.
Yeah. So some questions are this. When we talked about the registry, shifting it from where it is presently, where there's public access, to moving it to a private, where the courts and law enforcement have contact to it, and that's needed because you do have some individuals that can go to the extreme. And as a parent, I would want to know if there was an extremist, right, who they're pedophiles or just a dangerous criminal sexual, I don't even know the language for it, but they're dangerous. I would want to know where they're at in my neighborhood. So reducing it down to the men who are very and I don't even know how you
highest risk to recidivize.
At risk, yeah. That's
highest risk to recidivize. That's what we all want. We all want recidivism to be down and safe. So go ahead, Josh.
I'm going to say just a couple things here because I think you raised something that's really important. There are some kind of what we would call, I think we can call fairly myths. One of which is that people can't be cured, that you can't be fixed.
Right.
There's actually a gigantic organization called the Association of Treatment of Sexual Abusers. It's called ATSA. It's all the people who specialize in the treatment of people who've committed sex crimes. And they will tell you to a person, and there are thousands of them across the country, that is totally not true. you know, that people literally can change. And, you know, I mean, there's a reason why, let me just say this real quick. The actual evidence is, if you can look at hundreds of studies, that in the short term, you know, recidivism rates are related, you know, go in terms. So we usually look at a term of 3 years. And for people with sex offenses, the recidivism rate is actually 3%. And the longer, like with any of these things, the farther it ever goes up to is 9%. It's actually the second lowest risk of recidivism of all crimes. And we've been told different for a lot of years, but that's not what the evidence suggests. And that's why the courts are starting to react against sex offender registries, is because the evidence doesn't really support them. You know, the important thing to remember is that all of us have an incentive to feel protected, but we also have to be careful about false senses of security. The two most likely overall risks you have of sexual assault are first-time offenders, which is over 90%. And like I said, I think I might have said 91%, but I think it's 86% are friends and family members. Yeah. So the people who are in the registry are actually the lowest risk of you being. So if you put all your eggs in the basket of protecting yourself from the people who are on the registry, you're actually not protecting yourself from the most likely people to be a problem for you and your family.
Yeah, let me touch on that, because that's one of the things that we also address in Clean Slate when we're talking about having people who, whether they're, you know, sex offender or no, having people's convictions removed from their record. And so some of the data around that is, if a person has not had any involvement with the court system after 7 years, they are less likely to reoffend or offend ever again in any area than a person who's never offended. You know, so sometimes we have that in our mind that people who go to prison are the same people like going in and out of prison, and that's not true. People who are going to prison, a lot of people are under
that impression. You know, you talk to the general public who has no real understanding. They think it's the people are doing, oh, this is like his 20th time. You know,
it's people who are going to prison.
Yeah,
it's their first time. Yeah. And, you know, you have other people who have committed other offenses, but people who are going to prison, it's their first time. And they're the person who you work on a line with in a factory, or who is a family member, who is your neighbor. And all of a sudden we're like, he's a good guy. And then the next thing you know, we don't know what happened. Case in point, we have a prosecutor in Michigan who was just indicted for embezzling $3 million and sharing it with his colleagues. And he's our elected official prosecutor, the person who metes out justice. And we don't think that. So people who go to prison most often are people who have never been to prison in the first place, and are the people who we think are least likely to go to prison. And actually, it's the flip side is people who are least likely to go to prison are people who have already been there, right?
I have this conversation all the time in all kinds of topics. I can't tell you the amount of time where people will say something to me like, how could you defend someone who committed a murder? I'm like, man, a lot of my best friends committed murder. I know people who have come back from a murder charge and saved people's lives. You know, I mean, people are not the same people they start out as when they end up, you know. And if we don't get past the idea that people are more than their crime, we're never going to get past this mass incarceration problem.
Yeah, and I think that's where the work that you do, Nate, down with Fresh Coast Alliance, and I think that's what you bring to the table, is that message of restoration, redemption, renewal. Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. As a man thinketh, there goes he. And so, you know, how do you tap into the thinking of a person who's made poor decisions and correct that? And once a person starts to think differently, they'll do differently. And that's another one of the misconceptions, is that like people don't go to prison and think about what they've done. They definitely think about it. When the opportunities present, they definitely seek out those opportunities to do something about the way they thought and acted. And if those opportunities aren't there, for me, it came in solitary confinement, 6 years in solitary confinement. That changed my mind. And I spent a lot of time thinking about what I was going to do differently. And so here we all are, you know, foursome. We all had that experience, that change of heart and mind. That
it's all about growth, right?
Yeah, most definitely.
You know, for me, during my time incarcerated, I was one of those guys that, like many of us, if a guy had a sex crime, he was less than and was treated worse. And honestly, it wasn't until probably 10, 11 years into my prison term where I met a guy that, had a sex crime. He openly talked about his experience as a child, how he was victimized, became a victimizer, really got into it, understanding, was willing to talk about it and share, because he didn't want other people to experience this, right? And me having that encounter with that person is what changed the paradigm in which I viewed men and women that, are convicted of sex crimes. And like you had said at the opening, Troy, or Nate, most folks go to worst case scenario for whatever that is when you think of a sex crime, right? Whether it involves a child or whether it involves, like we were talking yesterday, somebody jumping from around the side of a bushes and grabbing somebody up. Like, we go to what our worst fear is, and that's what we imagine all folks to fit. Then we want to put them all in that box, right? And so it's like getting to know him and getting to understand and getting to see him understand his trauma and where it caused him, right? And then realizing all the good he did for years teaching classes inside, and then to come home. His biggest problem was he couldn't get a place. He had a job for several months. He could not find a place to live. It took one of the volunteers from the program in the prison, who was a then police commissioner in Detroit, to write a letter and sign for this man to get a place to live. Not because he couldn't afford it, not because he hadn't been holding it, but because he was a sex offender. Nobody wanted his money. They didn't want him living there, right? So it's like, once it became real for me and beginning to know people and understand their trauma and humanizing them, right, instead of demonizing them, is when, for me, I began to turn the corner, because I was one of those people who was like, hey, lock them up, put them, whatever they get, they deserve. That was just my mindset, just like a lot of people probably had the same mindset about me and the types of crimes I was committing that involved a weapon and armed robbery. They, there's a case that could have been made for me to never come home, based on my, 5th, 6th, and 7th felony conviction or whatever, right? So if what we want to do is heal the community, keep the community safe, then sometimes we have to look at things that make us uncomfortable, right? And like I said, the last few days, I've really been digging in on the research. Josh was great in providing a lot of that research for me, but it was very eye-opening. And at the end of the day, I want my community safer, and I'm willing to lobby to have these reforms, not because it's my job, but because it keeps my community safer. I do this for the change, not the check, right? And so,
remember, it is very true that a lot of these are terrible crimes. A lot of the crimes everyone I know has, I know tons of people who've done, these are terrible crimes. It doesn't make it okay. It doesn't make it, but I think J.J. Prescott said something really good in a hearing yesterday, a House Judiciary hearing yesterday. He said, we need to stop thinking about crime and recidivism as the same thing as a justification for the registry, because nobody has shown that the registry does anything to make people safer. You can be terrified about the crime. That doesn't mean the solution we created works. Right. And all of us are aware that the system doesn't always work very well.
Yeah. We have thousands, right? We have thousands of cases of here in Michigan. And I'll just lift up like one story quickly. Guy's over 18. He's in a bar, meets a young woman. She's in the bar. Only requirement is to what? Be 18. Meets her. They go out. At some point, they have sex. Turns out she's not 18. Turns out she's 15. However, he is 18. He's charged, subsequently sent to prison, lifetime registrant. His victim is his wife now, mother of his 2 children now, right? Nothing ever forcibly done, nothing ever. This man cannot go to his kids' school functions because he's a registered sex offender. This man will not watch his children walk across a stage in person to see them graduate because he's a sex offender on the registry for life. His victim is now his wife and mother of 2 children. So you tell me how the registry is, number one, keeping the community safer, or his victim, considering it's his wife.
Yeah.
And number 2, how are we helping the community? I mean, we're causing this rift between his children and him, his community and him, his school, and like he can't go to PTA, he can't go to a baseball. Are we okay with this? I mean, look at what this potentially has a long-term effect for this individual with his children. How this could affect him. This case has nothing to do technically with a child.
Right.
And there's thousands, not just a couple, not a few, thousands of cases like this in Michigan alone. And that's not okay.
I totally agree with you, but I'll just repeat that even for the people who've done whatever the terrible things are, people do change. And over time, people demonstrate that they change. And you have to, if you want this thing to work, you got to find ways to, meet people you have to let people become different people. Otherwise, you're going to if you tell everyone that there's, if you come back and you do everything right and you're still going to have a terrible life and you're still going to be oppressed all the time, why is anyone going to take that deal? I mean, it just doesn't make sense,
Yeah.
I know we're getting close to time, so maybe I could give you something to wrap up with.
Yes.
I have.
And make sure you let us know about the event too. So get on. You can share the screen and get on there. Tell us about what's coming up this afternoon too.
Yeah, I'll get that up.
Okay.
So another story from solitary confinement. I'm working a porter job one day, and there was another person I was working with said, "I'm not like the rest of these guys. I'm only in solitary confinement because I tried to escape from jail like 10 years ago, and that's still in my classification sheet. That's why they put me in level 5. And I sat down and thought about that, and I came up with this cycle of judgment. And so this doesn't only apply to people who are incarcerated, but to everybody, because we've all done something at one point or another that we could be judged for and potentially incarcerated for. So the drunk driver says, at least I'm not a thief. The thief says, at least I'm not an armed robber. Armed robber says, at least I'm not a drug dealer. Drug dealer says, at least I don't sell drugs to kids. The drug dealer also says, at least I'm not a rapist. The rapist says, at least I'm not a person who molests children. The child molester says, at least I'm not a snitch. And the snitch says, at least I'm not a drunk driver.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's that cycle of judgment. We all want to see ourselves in a better light than the next person. And what it does is it turns us all into judges. And I think that's one of the things that I had to work through in my life, just like Rick, because I was still not letting me share my screen. I was a person just like Rick who would judge people if their offense was different than mine.
Try it now.
And I think that as a society, we really haven't gotten past judging other people. And so what we want to do is we want to feel better about ourselves by judging other people and holding them like perpetually accountable. So, Josh, we got the flyer up for the event for this afternoon. You'd like to touch on that?
Yeah, we're going to have a discussion, kind of presenting a lot of the evidence we've been talking about for the last hour with a lot of experts. Miriam Ackerman, who actually took the Doe versus Snyder case here in Michigan all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. Vincent Schiraldi, who's an expert on supervision, parole, and probation in juveniles. And Judith Levine, who just wrote a book called The Feminist and the Sex Offender. And we're going to be discussing all of this and a lot more, that pretty much what we've just been talking about for the last hour, but in a lot more detail and with a lot of that research and with the experts. And that's coming up at noon today, Eastern Standard Time. And I'm the moderator. And, the last I heard, we're up around 400 people. So hopefully, we'll have, get up to around the 500 cap by the time it starts.
Yeah, this is definitely by far our largest group to to register for this event. Is this
It's going to be a great conversation.
Yeah, and there's still time. If you see at the bit.ly link at the bottom of that, just hit that bit.ly link and go and register and join us at noon.
Yeah, we got about 100 slots left.
Yeah, and they can find the link in the chat box. We dropped it in there. And if you aren't seeing the chat box, it's bit.ly/end the registry. So we look forward to having that conversation this afternoon. And Nate, always thank you for having us on for the Criminal Justice Cafe. I went and got my Mac Cafe, giving McDonald's, but they need to give you some endorsement money.
Getting your Mac on?
Tell them to give you some of that commercial money.
You got the yellow bag Kiwi coffee in there?
I'll have that next week.
Wait. All right.
With the noodle.
Take the screen off, Troy, so we can come back to close out. Thank you, sir. Well, good. Well, thank you, everyone, for tuning in. This was a great conversation, and we look forward to these on Thursday mornings, just discussing some of the issues that a lot of times we don't, on this platform, we don't see a lot of these conversations happening, such as, truth in sentencing. What about resources that are available for those returning home? A lot of people, there's a lot, especially on the reentry side, there's a lot of things that individuals just don't know. And it's different for each county. And understanding how the state of Michigan works, how there's different regions that are separated throughout the state, and there is coordinators over them that have access to different things. And so those are the kinds of discussions where we want to have, and a bunch of others. So we look forward to getting ready to unpack this over the summer, have these discussions, having our different guests on. Josh, thanks so much for joining us in this conversation here. It's much needed, and I'm quite sure we'll probably be back with more of this, because it's the subject is so vast that you can't satisfy it in 30, 45 minutes. It's going to take. So I'm sure we'll be back having more discussion, especially as we see the comments that come in, and we want to keep the conversation definitely going. So make sure you get on Safe and Just Michigan, like their page, tune in this afternoon. You can inbox Troy, Josh, Rick, or Kate. You can see her commenting in the sections here. Let them know, and they'll get the link to you. Register, and you'll get the Zoom link. And then if you haven't been on Fresh Coast Alliance page, make sure you get on there, like that, and then you keep updated. And then make sure you get on my page and follow Nathan Johnson, because with Fresh Coast, I do a lot of stuff on my own page because there's more of a following on here. And then a lot of times I share it over with Fresh Coast. Josh?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I also am the host of the Decarceration Nation podcast. So if anyone wants to check that out, feel free to go to decarcerationnation.com.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much for that. Make sure you check that out. Keep you updated on what's happening throughout the state. And Fresh Coast has some new gear, so make sure if you want one of these history makers.
History makers.
We don't go with the flow. We turn the tide.
Turn the tide.
That's right.
For $20 a pop. We got hats, flat bills, trucker hats, whatever you want. We got history maker caps and shirts. So inbox me, let me know, and we'll find out a way to get it.
And then next week, Troy, we're going to be talking about the governor's pretrial task force recommendations. Correct? We're going to be transitioning actually into a couple, like a series, because there are so many recommendations that came from the governor's pretrial task force. We'll probably have a series of Criminal Justice Cafe conversations. They're going to revolve around the 18 or so recommendations that came from the task force. So tune in next week and following weeks for task force updates and how you can get involved.
Jail's at an all-time low. We want to keep it that way.
Hey, Macomb County, for the first time since the 70s, has under 300 people. We're talking about a jail that I think holds 12 to 1,500, on average held 900 to 1,000. It's down to under 300 since COVID. And guess what? Crime ain't going up unless you're an elected official in Macomb County. I see they just got the water commissioner. They got the DA. They might have a little more room for them folks now, but for the people in the community, everyday people, we're keeping the community safe by letting people go home and not worry about their driving on a suspended license or the $300 bail that they can't afford, right? So tune in, learn how you can help make these recommendations into laws.
I did my jailing in Macomb County, and that doesn't surprise me very much.
Yeah, I visited a time or two.
Well, good. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Every Thursday, 10 a.m., right here on Nathan Johnson's Facebook page. Tune in. We'll be back next week with some good discussions, and we look forward to seeing you, seeing your comments and responding to them, being able to answer them. And in the future, we'll be having different guests on here who are experts in the lanes and the topics of what we're going to be discussing. So appreciate you guys. We look forward to seeing you guys soon. Peace out.